Portions of this program were pre-recorded.
Hi, this is Melba Tolliver. Join me and the rest of the Eyewitness News team at 11 o'clock right here on Channel 7.
This has been a color presentation of WABC TV News.
Martial law in Beijing may end within 2 days. Noriega points an accusing finger at the United States. The CMB wants higher bus fares. New protests break out in Eastern Europe. And a British film legend is dead at the age of 78. Good evening. Martial law in Beijing may be over within the next 2 days. Chinese...
This is Eyewitness News with Larry Kane and the Eyewitness News Team. Thursday, July 14th, 1977.
Good evening, I'm Larry Kane. Our big story on Eyewitness News is the live picture you see directly behind me.
This is NBC Nightly News with John Chancellor and David Brinkley. Tonight, August 16th, reported from the NBC News Center in New York.
Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42.
From New York, this is ABC News. Here now, Bill Butel.
Good evening. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger came back to Washington today and met with President.
Good evening. The news and sport from ITN. Tonight's headlines: ceasefire in Srebrenica as the UN prepares an airlift. Celebrations in Los Angeles after 2 policemen are found guilty in the Rodney King beating trial. And a senior South African politician is arrested in connection with the killing of Chris Hani.
And tonight's main sports headline: Mark Hughes tightens Manchester United's grip on the Premier League title.
All sides in the Bosnian conflict.
The next program on BBC One will also be shown on BBC Two at 10:50. The time now is 9 o'clock. At 9:35 tonight on BBC One, The Play for Today presents the flip side of Dominic Hyde, with Peter Firth in the title role as a time traveller who commutes between the future and the present. That's in 25 minutes after the main news with Angela Rippon.
The pop world and beyond mourn the Beatles' John Lennon, murdered in New York. The man who's said to have shot him as a 25-year-old from Hawaii. Police describe him as mentally disturbed. Meanwhile, John Lennon's New York admirers mount a vigil outside his home. At Strabane in Northern Ireland, gunmen ambush and shoot 3 detectives. One of them and a woman living nearby are in a serious condition. Heavier lorries will run on Britain's roads if the government backs up an official report, but they won't be any bigger. Good evening. Police in New York say the man they're holding for John Lennon's murder had...
The party continues on the first day of this new century. Even as the cleanup begins, the celebrations just don't quit, but they are joyful and tranquil.
We're deeply grateful that the celebrations were both jubilant and peaceful.
Americans optimistic about the future.
We're excited about seeing what new advances are going to take place with technology, and we're excited about going forward.
And there is a collective sigh of relief. No trouble, no Y2K glitches.
I'm pleased to report that what you already know, that we don't have anything to report.
And in Russia, the new president wastes no time showing who's in charge. All this on the dawning of a new millennium circling the globe.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News, reported by John Siegenthaler.
Good evening on the first day of 2000, when the world was prepared for something to go wrong.
With the latest headline news, I'm Gordon Graham. Debate over Medicare reform has been heated in the past, but the latest round turned into a partisan shouting match. Republicans want to eliminate 270...
But now the ITN News with Trevor McDonald.
The news from ITN.
Lamont again rejects devaluation as pound sinks to a new low. New Commonwealth agrees nuclear weapons control, but nothing else. The old Soviet Union's darkest secret, the city that built the bomb. And 70 and in a wheelchair, she was raped on Christmas Day. Good evening. The Chancellor, Mr. Norman Lamont, came under new pressure today as the pound fell to its lowest level against the Deutschmark.
Britain's first heart transplant patient for 5 years died 3 hours ago in Papworth Hospital near Cambridge. 44-year-old Charles McHugh from South Croydon in Surrey hadn't...
This is Thames from London. We now go over to Reginald Bosanquet and Sandy Gall at ITN.
Good evening. A select committee has made another strong attack on a minister. This time, it's Mr. Dennis Howell.
This is a rebroadcast of tonight's Channel 11 News 10 o'clock report.
KHOU-TV, Houston. And now, from 11 News in Houston, Steve Smith, Marlene McClinton, Dr. Neil Frank with weather, and Gib Nielsen on sports. This is KHOU 11 News at 10.
It's a mockery of human decency to call these people guests. They are hostages, and the whole world knows it.
An angry President George Bush tonight lashing out at Iraq's Saddam Hussein. The president tells the Congress and the nation Saddam will fail. Good evening, everybody. Marlene has the night off. The president tonight vowed to stand firm.
It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Bryant Gumbel. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan. You're looking at the World Trade Center.
Добрый вечер. Здравствуйте, товарищи. Заявление советского правительства. Действуя в точном...
Good afternoon. War veterans have mounted another protest against the state visit of...
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather substituting for Walter Cronkite. And in Washington, Ike Pappas, Marvin Kalb, Bob Schieffer, Roger Mudd, Daniel Shore, Terry Drinkwater at Camp Pendleton, California, David Dick in Niceville, Florida, and Roy Caron in Marshalltown, Iowa.
Good evening. A quarter century of American involvement in South Vietnam is over.
The state campaign. Nick Greiner promises no new taxes. Heart trouble for President Bush. And Norths jump back on top of the league ladder. Good evening. Well, it's taken just 2 days, but already taxes are a hot issue.
The Wood Royal Commission given greater power to investigate pedophiles. Plans unveiled for the new home of the Royal Easter Show. And Gay Waterhouse wins her appeal against a 3-month suspension. Good evening. The state government has moved to widen the...
from ABC News. This is World News This Morning for Friday, April 15th, 1983. It's 6 a.m. Now from our Washington news desk, Kathleen Sullivan and Steve Shepard sitting in for Steve Bell.
Good morning, everyone. In the top of the news this morning.
Good morning. This is today, Monday, January 4th, 1982. And you are looking on at one of the most beautiful skylines in the world. It will include the Sears Tower. The first working day for many of us, this 1982, but not for some of us. Yeah. And welcome. I'm Bryant Gumbel. I will resist the urge to say sitting in for Tom Brokaw.
A plane crashes in England. The United States and the Soviet Union maneuver over chemical weapons, and in Illinois, a tornado strikes a small town.
This is NBC Nightly News, reported by Garrick Utley.
Good evening from Los Angeles. It was a routine flight today from London to Belfast, Northern Ireland. 125...
From NBC News election headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Yes, we're still here, and it's still...
Здравствуйте. Информационная служба общественного российского телевидения о событиях в воскресенье.
The CTV National News with Lloyd Robertson.
Good evening. Canada's suspected spy appeared in court today after hours of conversation with investigators.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. We begin tonight with President Clinton's latest assessment of the new world order. Mr. Clinton was here in New York today.
From the studios of ITN, the news and sport with Nicholas Owen and Graham Miller.
Hello, welcome to the program. The headlines: mystery blast as the tense Japanese embassy siege goes on.
And in sport, horrors in Harare, England collapse against Zimbabwe.
Mystery still surrounds an early morning explosion at the Japanese embassy residence in...
250,000 people greet the historic First Fleet reenactment in Botany Bay.
And Melbourne's Anne Minter scores the biggest win of her career, eliminating Pam Shriver from the Australian Open.
Seven Nightly News with Jennifer Kite and Glenn Taylor.
Good evening. Also, disturbing revelations about the sorry state of care in Victoria's nursing homes.
And a near riot angers young...
The Royal to track thousands in the Mall, the Hawke Economic Summit underway, and Masters Golf. This is National 9 News.
Good evening, Don Seckham and Paul Griffin in Brisbane. The people of Brisbane turned on the biggest welcome ever today.
Evening to Now News at 10 with Trevor McDonald.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10 with Trevor McDonald.
Major sees recovery, CBI says the recession's spreading. Arms for Iraq, Labour claims new evidence against the Prime Minister. Kegworth disaster families could get massive compensation. And 40 years of the pop charts, but do they really matter anymore? Good evening. No one should get pay rises of more than 1.5%.
Poštovani gledalci, predsjednik Jugoslovenske vlade Milan Panić danas u kraćoj radnoj posjeti Rumuniji.
Сегодня в выпуске. В Москве начало работу Федеральное собрание России. В Брюсселе завершилась чрезвычайная сессия НАТО. Вероятно, что на пути в Россию американский президент сделает остановку на Украине. Правительство Латвии наказывает виновных в провокации против российских военных и дипломатов. Курс рубля вновь резко падает по отношению к доллару и марке. О событиях в стране и за рубежом новости Первого телеканала.
Well, back to Friday morning now as the time fast approaches 6 o'clock and we join Nicholas Witchell and Laurie Mayer for the breakfast news.
John Major is on his way back to Downing Street. The Conservatives have won the general election and they're heading for an overall majority. Hello, good morning to you from Laurie and me. The time is 6 o'clock on Friday the 10th of April, the day the Conservatives are beginning a fourth...
The BBC News at 9, now on BBC One with Peter Sissons.
Africa's AIDS epidemic, a drugs breakthrough gives hope to the children. It's cheap and it could halve the numbers born infected. Salvaging the peace process, Molam insists the Good Friday Agreement is intact. And long-term health care, good news for some, but many will still have to pay. Good evening. In the life or death battle against Africa's AIDS epidemic, a ray of...
Is the fight going out of the battle against AIDS? President Clinton's advisors let him know, and they don't pull any punches. Republicans attack the Attorney General and cozy up to the head of the FBI. And the Vice President hopes the world warms up to American proposals on global warming. From Atlanta, this is CNN Headline News. I'm Denise Dillon.
With Frank Warwick and Kay McGruff, this is 7 Nightly News.
Tonight, police reinforcements rushing to the Gold Coast.
New fears in Australia's beef export crisis. And a blow for England on the eve of the first test. Good evening. Special crowd control police are being sent to the Gold...
Good morning. I'm Charles Kuralt, and this is Sunday Morning. Nelson Mandela, for 27 years a prisoner and a silent symbol, came to North America last week.
This is NBC News Update, brought to you by American Express Travelers Checks. Here is Lloyd Dobbins.
Good evening. Here's some news. The president of North Yemen and his brother have been assassinated. That's according to radio.
With Frank Warwick and Kay McGruff, this is 7 News.
Tonight, police shoot dead a crazed man after a terrifying rampage. A federal minister afflicted by Legionnaire's disease.
Mackay on alert as big crocodiles creep closer. And Origin gladiators ready for battle in Sydney.
Good evening, everyone. Police say they had no alternative but to shoot a crazed man who menaced them after rampaging through Deception Bay last night. The knife wheel...
CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Congressional leaders meet with President Reagan as he prepares to address them and the nation tonight, his State of the Union address.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Tuesday, January 28th. With Reed Collins in Washington, Marianne Laughlin and Bob Kane in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. The unseasonably cold weather in Dixie is affecting even the launch of the space.
KPRC TV, Channel 2, Houston's 24-hour news source. Now, Channel 2 News at 5. With Bill Biessa, Jan Carson, Roland Galvan, Craig Roberts, and the Channel 2 News team.
Anticipation, they're antsy. They want something to happen.
Troops in the Saudi desert waiting with the world to hear what is going to happen next. Good evening, everyone. The White House says a military strike against Iraq could happen any time.
Troops and civilians are...
Civil servants are to be investigated for insider dealings. The government opts to buy the American AWACS, not Nimrod. Drug addicts will get free needles to reduce AIDS. The wife who survived having her throat cut. A doctor is jailed for child porn offenses. Good evening. A major inquiry has been launched in...
Now from ITN, the latest world news with the time at 10 o'clock.
President Reagan sends Mr. Haig to settle the Falklands. Has Mr. Pym got a Foreign Office compromise? Tour ship to troop ship, the Canberra turns round. The Princess keeps a date in Wales. And Villa go 1 goal up in Europe. Good evening. President Reagan is sending his Secretary of State, Mr. Alexander...
The Allies say they're reaching their objectives to launch the ground attack. Baghdad buries its dead. The Allies say it was a military bunker. And a tornado is lost in combat. Good morning, you're watching Sky News Sunrise.
Tonight, a violent night in the District of Columbia. Good evening. I'm Jim Vance.
And I'm Dave Maris. Two separate shooting incidents.